Call to order this workshop for project design and detention ponds for August 3rd, 2021. Justin?
All right. Thank you, Justin Bland, City Engineer. So I think this kind of came up a couple months ago, just the kind of the idea of just to review what we look at when we look talking about detention. So I've tried to put together some slides here that aren't just kind of a 10,000 foot view here, not getting too technical, but we're going to kind of start with some basic things just to kind of lead up into how we consider this when we're looking at calculations. So when you're talking about drainage, there's really kind of three things you're really concerned about. It's, you know, how much precipitation, how fast it comes down, which we call the intensity, and then how much of it runs off of the surface versus soaks in. So in our drainage manual, when you talk about how much precipitation, we kind of narrow it down to design storm events. And they're based on statistical analysis of weather records, and they only, the records only go back 100, 150 years. So we do see anomalies, and these numbers are updated periodically by the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, if I can say that. So these, if you look at the most recent version, I think some of these have been changed by maybe a tenth or so, but it's kind of a minor change. But and then when we talk about these design storm events, we use the term 100-year storm, and this isn't really meant to mean that it's only supposed to happen once every 100 years. Instead, it's meant to mean that it's a storm that has a 1% chance of happening any given year. So it's kind of more of a statistics term. So like if you divide the 1 by the return period on that table, it gives you the percentage chance of happening. So a 2-year, 1 divided by 2 would be a 50% chance of seeing that storm on any given year. And sometimes you see these more often in a year, and then typically if the averages are correct, it'll balance out like in a drought year where you wouldn't see those. So kind of like to think about it like if you did the 2-year storm, compare it to flipping a coin, 50-50, in theory you're going to see heads every 2 flips, but in reality you might get 3 or 4 heads in a row and then 3 or 4 tails in a row, and that's kind of how like a 2-year storm would be perceived. So just kind of looking at this table, the amount of precipitation is one part of it, but it's also over the time period which it comes down. So our standard design storms are 24-hour events. So the 100-year event is 8.9 inches in a 24-hour period. I don't know that we've seen that in Siloam proper here over the last 10 years, but I know that in upstream of and probably further northeast, we have seen that event here within actually the last 3 years. So, and I know one of those events was when the city lake flooded over the berm, which I don't think we'd ever seen in the past. So we have been in the close proximity to these 100-year storm events, definitely. And then, another thing to look at it is that, we have listed the 1 hour and the 24-hour in this table, but if you look at the charts, I mean, there are all kinds of different time periods. So I think back in April we had, was it like 3 or 4 inches in a 2-hour period. So if you can go actually go and look at the charts up for that and, see where that compares on the statistics. So there's a lot of data out there, but this is just what's in the drainage manual, and the 24-hour is the one that we actually really focus on. Oops. And just to kind of show how these annual numbers change over time, this is a graph of the annual rainfall for the Illinois River watershed over the last 125 years. Actually took this slide. The mayor and I went to an IRWP meeting, and this is a from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers presentation about this, but they have climate data going back to 1895. And on this chart, you can see the 0 line is actually just what the average is. So since we have usually 46 to 47 inches per year, you can just kind of imagine that as, say, 46 inches. And then, 10 and 20, that'd be an extra 10 or 20, and then minus 10 or 20. And each red bar on here is a year, and it kind of shows what that deviation is for that given year. So you can see in 2019, which is the last bar on this data deal, it was about 25 inches above average. So, and you know, that would be about 71 inches of rain. So that's kind of what we're seeing there. So, you know, it's kind of interesting to see the patterns. And, you know, one thing I noted was that throughout the 90s and then the early part of the 2000s, things were, if you look at this area right here, things were really, there's probably about a decade where things were just really average, a little bit above and a little bit below. But then as you get into the early 2000s, you start seeing this fluctuation. You know, going into 04, 05, I remember we had a couple of years of drought. And then over this last decade, it's kind of seesawed a little bit. But generally speaking, we see more wet years than dry years. The blue line on the graph is just the moving average over this time period. It's kind of the one that's kind of hidden in the gray there. So it kind of goes up and down, and you can kind of see, you know, over the last 10 years here, it's really starting to ramp up. And you know, what does that mean? I mean, if we could have several years of drought and it could just balance back out, it could mean that we're, you know, just getting in this wetter cycle where things are going to be wet. So it's really hard to say, but over the last 5 years, it's definitely been above average.
Justin, is that last year 2020?
I believe the data last year is 2019. I think there's a little gap between it's 2020.
You know how many we've had already this year?
I looked. We're just about average so far this year, within an inch or so. And you know, and I'll get to this in the next slide, but you can kind of see here as well the 2015 and then the 2019 peaks. They were two of the wettest years in recorded history here. So that was just kind of the general climate data we had. We also found that Drake Field over in Fayetteville has annual rain records going back to 1949. So there's about 70 years worth of data. These are the 5 highest annual rainfall amounts, and basically we had 2 in the last 5 or 6 years in that top 5, which was 2015 and 2019. 2019, we compared that with what we recorded at the sewer plant. You know, someone's out there every day with a rain gauge, and we actually had about 83.8 inches in Siloam that year. And then we had another gauge on the southeast side of town that had 74 inches in 2019. So we actually, that could have been the wettest year. You know, we don't have detailed data within city limits. It's hard to know for sure, but it's definitely up there as one of the wettest years over the last 100 years. You know, in addition to this annual rainfall, it appears there's also a trend in the Midwest where the rain events are becoming more extreme. You know, the general idea is that we see, you know, fewer rain events each year, but we get more rain per event. And I've been to a couple conferences where they talk about this more regionally speaking. So I don't have any specific data for Siloam. That is just something that I've been seeing some of the government agencies talk about. But regardless of the intensity, the overall annual rainfall has definitely been higher more recently. So that kind of talks about the precipitation and how fast it comes and how much comes. But the third factor is how much runs off the ground and goes into the ditch and the pipes. And you know, the base factor that we use to consider this is just what kind of soil we have. Sandier soils have, you know, bigger sand particles with bigger voids, so that basically the water can kind of soak through them and drain into the ground faster, and that means less water runs off them. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have clay soils, which are just really much smaller, tiny. They compact smaller, and less water is soaked into the ground, so more of it runs off. So this map here is it's a soil map. They have maps of the entire U.S. that show the different types of soils. And then you can see the yellow line is the city limits. And if you look at the legend, it's kind of a spectrum going from sandy to more clay soils. So the dark blue is the soils with high sandy content. So that means more water soaks in and less runs off. And then the light blue is just a little less sandy. And then if you turn red, it gets more clayey. And then the dark red is the highest clay content. So the most would run off. So lucky us, we have probably 90% of our soils are high clay content. So we just generally speaking have a lot of water that runs off into the ditches and streams. So, what does this mean? Generally speaking, more water runs off the surface into the ditches and pipes, and the water doesn't soak into the ground very fast. But Siloam's always been this way. This is the existing conditions. The bigger point is that when these clay soils become saturated, they take much longer to dry out, and then when you get rain on saturated soils, more water runs off because there's just not any room for it to soak into the soil. So if you take this and consider that 2019 was a very wet year, it explains a lot of the soggy yards we saw around town where we hadn't noted them before. I think we had more complaints about wet yards that year than I'd ever heard of before, and it was just, you got this water that just won't drain out of, so much water, and then we can't get it out of the soil, so it just stays there. So I think that explains a lot of what we saw. This saturated soil can also cause flooding issues because as soil becomes saturated, more water runs off of it than when it's completely dry. So if you have a 4-inch rainfall and everything's completely dry, you're going to see less water downstream than if you have a 4-inch rainfall after a couple of rainy days, because the ground's already kind of soaked up what it can. So as you see these events where you have 5 or 6 rains in a month, that's really setting up for really bad flooding downstream. And I think we've had spans of that over the last several years where we've seen a lot of those kind of events. So that kind of talks about just the summary of the soils, but how do you get from there to, and what changes with the development? So, and then again, this is kind of the simplified version of all this. But to address this, we look at different ratios for different conditions so that it can be calculated and we can run the numbers. You can see that this is a chart of ratios that kind of show the amount of water that runs off. So you can see here that the basic pasture land, just open field, the runoff ratio is 0.4. So that basically means, just generally speaking, 40% of the water in a field runs off and 60% soaks into the ground. If you turn that open field into a residential development, you can see that this number jumps up to 0.6. So that means 60% runs off and 40% soaks in. So basically you're increasing the runoff by 50%. And then as you go down to commercial development, it goes up to 0.9. So you're just kind of ratcheting it up that more and more that's running off. And there are different variations in this. Single family versus duplex versus apartments, you're going to see different ratios, but these are just kind of the basic numbers. But you can see, easily, if you have an open field going to, commercial center, you have over twice as much runoff, and you have to deal with that one way or the other. So, how do you mitigate that? The drainage manual, the basic idea behind development is that a development shouldn't increase the peak flow from the site from pre-development to post-development. And typically we do this with stormwater detention, but there's one other way, which I'll show an example of later on. And that's basically just by reducing the amount of area that drains to a site, in the post-development condition versus the pre-development condition. So the more common approach is the detention basins. And detention basins, the idea is that basically as you drain all the water to the basin, it slows the water down and holds a certain amount, and then slowly releases it out through an outlet structure. Detention basins, they're meant to address the peak flows that exit the site, but they don't address any volume difference. So you're not really planning on any water soaking into the ground in a detention basin. It's going to be there and held temporarily and then be let out downstream. A lot of times detention and retention is used as the same word, but technically retention basins are intended to actually hold the water and let it soak into the ground, and typically they wouldn't have an outlet structure. I don't know that we have a true retention basin in Siloam. As most of you guys could probably tell, once you start digging down, most of the ground, if it just rains, it just fills up and just holds the water. It doesn't actually soak into the ground. So out west, like in Arizona, they have the sandier soils that can actually infiltrate, and they can actually address that volume and they just let it soak back in the ground. But we don't have that luxury here. Is everybody with me so far as kind of general stuff? I know this is probably maybe a little boring, but it's just kind of basic stuff here. So, so just a couple of units that we use for vocabulary. So that, you know, there's really the volume of runoff that we consider, and then the flow rate. Those are the two kind of metrics that we use with drainage. And, you know, so the volume is the amount that runs off the site. So for instance, if you had a 1 acre tract of pasture land and you get 1 inch of rainfall, you could say that the amount of rainfall that fell is 1 acre inch. So it's 1 inch deep over that entire acre of land. And then you can just do those ratios from there. So like in the previous slide, you know, if you had 40% of the water would run off and 60% would soak in, so you'd have 0.4 acre inches running off. We also use units like acre feet or cubic feet, and those are all kind of interchangeable just depending on, you know, what your end goal is there. You know, flow rates, the volume per time unit. So that's more cubic feet per second. That's like, you know, what's going underneath the bridge on Sager Creek at any given time. Like, what's that flow rate at that point in time? So those are kind of the two metrics that we're going to talk about here moving ahead. So this kind of just shows just a little graphic. It's just, again, just kind of a basic layout of this. But if you assume the yellow line is just 1 acre of pasture land on a hillside, you know, you can go back to that 1 inch rainfall over the entire thing. You know, you're going to get 0.6 acre inches of volume that's going to soak into the ground, and then 0.4 acre inches that would drain to the low point of the property, which is kind of shown here in this drawing. And then, you know, this low point where all the water drains from the site, that's typically where we do the analysis for any given development. You know, we're looking at where everything collects and where it exits that property. So that would be kind of the point of interest in our drainage studies. You know, one note on this is that if we're wanting to know when the peak flow rate hits that point there that I circled, you really need that point in time where the entire acre has runoff contributing to it. So there's going to be a point where, like if this is the high point of the property here, well, you know, that raindrop's going to hit, and it's going to kind of slowly meander down into one of these little tributaries, and then just kind of slowly make its way all the way down here. So if it takes 30 minutes for it to get from that high point down to the low point, that's really probably when you're going to see that peak flow rate downstream, and that'll come up a little bit later on. But the idea is that you have to have that whole area contributing, in most cases, before you see the peak rate of flow from any, you know, given drainage area. And that kind of gets us into the the fun stuff. So what we got here is it's what we call a hydrograph, and this is a way we can show how water drains from a piece of property. So it's basically a plot of the flow rate of runoff leaving a site over time. So from left to right is just time, and then, you know, up and down is the flow rate. So, you know, this is kind of a simplified example, but, you know, basically the idea is, you know, as it starts raining here, and, you know, this is, if you go back to the other example, we're looking at this steady point down here at the bottom end of the hill. So at that point, it starts raining, you know, you're going to see that the water running through there start ramping up, and then at some point it's going to come to a peak. And like in that previous example, if we said it was 30 minutes, you know, that's how that correlates to that. So that basically you can get that peak flow rate, you know, the entire acre is contributing to it, and then the rain starts to let up, and then, you know, the flow rate's going to recede. And the neat thing about this from the engineering point of view is that when you plot these flow rate curves out, the area underneath this curve is equal to the amount of runoff. And there's some pretty handy applications of that we'll kind of talk about a little bit later. But, you know, in that previous example, again, if you had that acre of pasture, you know, we know that there's 0.4 acre inches of runoff. That's going to be the area underneath this curve here. So that would be kind of what you know, existing hydrograph looks like for undeveloped piece of property. If you were to go in and develop that into a commercial shopping center, that's going to change. You're going to change the patterns. You're going to change how much is coming off. So on this chart here, the blue is just what we looked at before. The red is this post-development runoff or flow rate curve. And there are a few takeaways on how this changes things. The first is the peak flow rate occurs more quickly, and this is because as you add impervious surface, pipes, ditches, et cetera, the water can travel across the site faster. So, previously we were coming over here at say 30 minutes before we saw that peak, but now that we're speeding things up, it might be 20 minutes instead. So you have to deal with that, because that's going to happen. The second thing is that the peak flow rate is going to be higher, and then that's just a combination of there's a lot more pervious surface, and it also comes faster as well to that point. The third thing is, and kind of going back to the same thing, that the area under the red graph is going to be greater. So if you go back to that 1 acre tract of pasture land, we knew the pre-development condition, it's 0.4 acre inches of runoff. And if we went all the way back to that chart, we looked at, we saw commercial property, it said it was 0.9 acre inches. So the area under these two curves, and it's probably not drawn that way exactly, but the idea is you're going to have to deal with that extra volume. And then the last thing, and this is where there's really a great application for these, is that this hatched area that you see in red, which I can't really highlight because it depends in red, but this area right here, that's actually the volume of detention you need in a basin to kind of mitigate this increase. So have I lost anybody or too badly on this, or is it pretty straightforward? Or it's exciting. Yeah, I really tried.
No, I'm serious.
Okay, well, good.
That didn't come across well. I'm sorry, man.
Yeah.
I'm trying.
You have not lost me.
All right.
And whoever drew that picture of the slope looking like a golf course, they did a great job.
Trying to grade it like a math teacher, and I'm really struggling for a minute.
So far, he's got a good grade, Marlon.
No.
Seriously, though, I just hopped over because we used to use NOAA's hydrology, and they've got, monitoring station on the Illinois River. So at the firehouse, when we had these weather events, you get on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a hydrograph, exactly. It shows the flow through the time through there. That's right. Okay, so the red again is post-development, blue is pre-development. So how do you mitigate this? So now we're going to throw another chart on here, and this is the green's this is the idea behind detention basins. So in this one, basically you're going to have this pond with a certain amount of volume. So when water hits that, you're going to have an outlet structure that's going to restrict how much can come out of it. So you're going to limit how much comes out of that pond so it doesn't exceed the pre-development peak flow rate, which is this right here. So basically, with the outlet structure in the detention basin, you let the water coming out, but then you cap it, and then the idea is you would hold that flow rate out of the detention basin so it doesn't exceed the pre-development. And that's what we're really shooting for right there, is that you don't get that increase. But what that doesn't do is that doesn't take care of any volume. Even with detention, if you go back to that, if you have 0.4 acres to begin with, and you go to 0.9 acre inches, you're still going to get 0.9 acres volume running through that basin and going downstream. The detention doesn't address the volume; it just slows the water down so the peaks don't exceed what you had before.
So Justin, does that relate to questions that I've had before when there are citizens that have come expressing concerns about extra drainage problems when new developments go in? And I've asked the question, well, will the detention basins that are in the plan, will that help the existing problems? And I felt like you have thought that they would, so that is the case. So where there was no detention basin before, could help even existing problems or problems that were there before?
Yeah,
Even though you're saying the flow, I mean, despite the impacts you just mentioned.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so a lot of times what we'll do is there's a relationship between how much volume there is in a detention basin and how much you can release. And so if we know we have a trouble area, you can oversize that detention basin so that you lower that rate even more.
Okay.
And that's a lot of times what we'll do in these areas if
Okay.
we know there's a problem downstream.
Okay.
And I think you just did that out on Country Club, that last housing development. And then we go right in the county, that retention basin that's being built is higher than the neighbor. I mean, it's significant. I mean, if you look at it right now, it's a significant basin.
It is, and there's this combination of that. They do lower it quite a bit below, and it's also part of this other thing I'm about to get into. I actually can use that as an example, so that this sets up well. So that's like I said, that's just I guess the main takeaways there. I just wanted to kind of make sure that it was understood that that there's a difference between the peak rate and runoff and the volume. So when a lot of times we get comments about, well, there's more water coming down. There is more water coming down in these events. Our goal is just to slow it down so that the peak, it doesn't exceed what a culvert and a roadway or any sort of existing drainage structure can handle. But there is going to be more water. It's just that we lower that rate and we sustain it for longer. But it's just a lower peak. That and the idea is that like I said, any culverts on our roadways, they've been handling that pre-development number. So we lower it down to that level and we just hold it for that a little bit longer than it was before.
So Justin, before you leave that slide, you briefly touched on it, but it's important, I think, to know you extend that time of that runoff. I mean, the takeaway from that slide is I'm holding at the peak, but before pre-development, it ran off, it peaked and then it slowed down. Here it peaks and it extends for a period of time because that's the volume that it's slowly running off, but there's more water. It's just at the same amounts being run off over a longer period of time, right?
That's exactly right. Yes. So that's detention. So getting to Brad's point, Mission Hills. This is an example of there's some places where detention doesn't work for various reasons, and there's a different way to approach that. So this map here shows Mission Hills, which is up off Country Club Road. So this you got north facing up, south of there is Endura Park, and then you have Webb Wheel here to the southeast. So this is the existing side. It's just an open hayfield there for many years. There's a high point in the middle of the property. So there's water flows in 3 different directions, and you see these orange circles here. These are the discharge points for the property. So in the pre-development condition, the northwest corner had 8.183 acres draining to it. And if you look at the drainage plans, there's not any detention basins up there. There's just a detention basin up here in the northeast in the southeast corner. So how does that work? So if you flip here to the next slide, what they've done is that basically by the grading of the roads, they've reduced the amount of area that drains that northwest corner. So it went from 8.13 acres down to 3.34 acres. So this is basically a 59% reduction in the area of land that drains there. And that kind of balances out. If you go back to those coefficients we looked at, there's like a 50% jump when you go to 0.4 to 0.6. So basically by reducing the amount of land that goes to that corner, even though there's more impervious area, you're either going to keep or decrease that peak flow rate going to that corner. So that's basically a lot of times you'll see, especially smaller commercial sites where it may only make sense to have one detention pond. They'll just grade more to the pond and less to the other exit points of the property. But there is a downside to this, and that area has to drain somewhere still. So in this case, roughly say 5 acres, it was like 8, now it's 3. Well, now you're draining that in these roads, and you're putting it into these other 2 detention basins in one way or the other. So they have to make those detention basins bigger to accommodate that extra flow. And you are kind of moving the volume around so that you're kind of putting more volume in different tributaries. But again, you know, we're going back to the basic principles of it. The peak flow rate is what kind of controls that.
That page there, you've got the proposed pond in the northeast corner and then the smaller one in the southeast corner. What is it right there in the middle? It says OC drainage on the right side, near the street in the middle. Does it say OC drainage?
I think it's Country Club, CC. I think it's
Country Club, CC drainage, okay, Country Club. Well, right in the very middle, it says northeast drainage, and there's just a blank spot where there's no homes, like that middle column. There's a big blank space where there's no homes. It's less homes than the one on each side. What is there going to be a drainage or what is that empty for?
Is this area right here that I'm circling on the screen?
It's just above it. It's like.
This area right here.
It's a big empty space where there's no homes, but it looks like there should be homes.
Yeah, that's a park area. They designated it as a park.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was wondering. So you're saying, is there going to be any kind of a pond on the west side of this or not? How can where you have the 3.34 acres in yellow on the left, there's going to be more homes right there, right? We just don't see them.
Mm-hmm.
How will these homes on this side be able to be covered by, where will the water go from the ones on this side? I'm lost.
So if you go back to the previous slide,
Yeah.
Originally there's 8 acres that drains to that point, but you're reducing that to just 3 acres. So basically by reducing the area, even though you're building homes and sidewalks and everything, it kind of compensates. The reduced area compensates for the extra impervious area, so that it still drains to where it naturally did, which is this little spot right here, that blue thing. But the balance is that you don't increase the peak flow. So it's kind of like there's a trade-off. It's less area, but it is more impervious area, and the numbers just kind of balance out when you do the calculations.
And there's homes there to the left of that 8.13 acre area? Is there another addition right there?
There is. So yeah, there's it's called the Crossing Subdivision, and so like there's a ditch that actually comes right down between these houses. There's a couple of cul-de-sacs right here,
okay.
And so they're discharging. This property already drained into this ditch that just kind of headed west down the hill. So it all goes to the same place it previously did,
Okay.
but we're just kind of like I said, we're manipulating it so that we know we're adding more impervious area, but we're decreasing the area, so that peak rate stays the same or decreases.
So the Mission Hill subdivision has been approved, but not started building yet. The one below at the Endura Park, that one has started.
So Mission Hills, I think they just broke ground. They've started work on it. Endura, they've actually final platted and they started building homes on it.
They are building homes on it. Okay.
Justin, the other thing to note on that northeast is if we go back a couple of years on Sherwood and Little John, those developments there, and the folks we had up here, and the neighbor right to that northeast detention pond that didn't want Siloam to develop because they wanted to live in the country for the rest of their lives, but next to the city limit. Davidson Road, that is the lowest point. And I'm just speaking specifically for Ward 2, the lowest point for the largest discharge where we've gotten the most complaints in the county. I think we can clearly say that. And I think I said a couple of meetings ago, I went out after that last rain event, it was significant rain, and noticed that the discharge from the work they'd done over on Sherwood, which is a Crine development, and I know they've done some work out there, and the discharge was much less. So it's going to be interesting when these two completely develop, if your calculations work.
Sure.
I was about to say the same thing, Brad. You just, you just summed it up, what I was thinking in my head.
Mother Nature's gonna, I wanna believe, I mean, I went out there after that rain, and in this one here, they've got, there's no roofs. Endura Park's got some roofs. This one's got some foundation, so you really couldn't tell the shed. But the system, everything seems to be working. And I just hope that area there for that, because I know Philip tried to work with the county on that. That's just a tough area, because, topographically,
Where everything goes.
you can't win there. I mean, that's like a big drain.
It
so.
practically goes into a holler there where
Yeah.
it meets the
rough.
paved going east and then dirt road going left on Davidson. I take that all the time, and that whole thing going up the hill, up the dirt road, it just needs a whole redo by the county. It's unbelievably narrow, and when it's a lot of rain, it's just a flood. You can just tell by looking at it.
But-
Yeah, as Brad said, it'll be interesting to see how it all turns out.
So on that basin you're talking about, I actually use that as an example. So I did just want to mention, while I got an opportunity here, just to, I get a lot of feedback that detention basins aren't working because, they don't fill up every time it rains. And I just wanted to, make sure it was clear that, these they're designed to accommodate like the 2-year event through the 100-year event. So unless we get 9 inches in a 24-hour period, it's not expected that you would see most of those ponds full of water. You may only see, 90% of the storm or the rain events we get, you might only get a foot of water in them, and that's expected, because that's just, if they were designed to hold that much water with just a 2-inch or 2-year rain event, when the 100-year came, like you'd already be using that volume. So you need to keep that extra space for the bigger rain events as they come through. And then just to kind of talk, this table here is actually that northeast pond that Brad was talking about there. Each row is the different storm event. And just real briefly, if you look at the second column, that's the post-development inflow. So that's basically after everything's built, what's draining into that pond. And like, for instance, in the 100-year event, you got 91 CFS going into it. And then the post-develop outflow is what's exiting that outlet structure from that pond after it's detained, and you can see it gets dropped down to 19.5. So they've really over detained that, is what we call that. They've reduced that substantially, and that's why it's so big. And that's we know there's drainage issues downstream, so I think it's actually a reduction in the pre-development as well. And then just furthermore, the point here was that if this pond at the bottom's supposed to be an elevation 1172. This fourth column is the water surface elevation in each storm event. So in the 2-year event, it's supposed to be 1175, so it's supposed to be 3 foot deep. But that's, the pond itself is going to be 7 or 8 feet deep. So you're not going to get that full depth until you get the 100-year, which is, again, 9 inches in 24 hours, which is, hopefully doesn't happen very often.
Justin, what kind of materials do they just use? The existing rock and soil that's there, or do they improve it any to improve the quality of the soil that's in the detention basin?
Like when they're building the berms around it, usually it just depends on what's on site. If it's, you really want something with clay that'll compact. So if they have to bring in like hillside, we call it hillside, it's that red dirt that you see there's a red dirt pit on the east side of town. So a lot of times they'll bring that in. Most of Siloam actually has that pretty good material, fairly shallow. So they can usually just use it for digging the roads, and it's a suitable material for it. And then just the last thing, I know we're getting a little short on time here, but I just wanted to mention, so there are situations where detention basins can increase the peak runoff from an area. And just general rule of thumb, if you're up in the upper third of a drainage basin, typically you always want detention. If you're in the middle, it needs to be analyzed. And if you're in that lower third, it's possible that detention could make it worse. So so a lot of times when you're at the very bottom of the hill, maybe you don't do detention, and that's actually better. So just to kind of show that, this is a big map here. The yellow is the area that drains to Sager Creek as it crosses the state line. It's a big area. historically, John Brown hasn't done any stormwater detention on their campus. And that's basically because they're so far downstream and they're adjacent to the floodplain. It actually makes it better for them just to discharge and have the peaks from their site get into Sacred Creek and go on before the bigger peak, from upstream arrives. And if you go back to the peak is when that whole area is contributing. It's going to take some time from, we're over here past 59 and north of Bill Young Road for all that area to kind of meander its way through town. So it's much better for JBU to not do detention in that situation. And just going back to the engineering way of doing this, these hydrographs, and again, these are kind of simplified, but without detention, the blue would be kind of the flow rates leaving JBU, kind of go up and down, and then the red would be the off-site. And if you're trying to combine these and add them, you actually add at each point, you just kind of add them, and that basically you would create that black line. So by not doing detention and having an offset in those peaks, you're not increasing the overall flow. I'm kind of rushing through this, but just to get that idea across. But this next slide here kind of shows if you detain that peak and you sustain it so that it overlaps with that bigger peak upstream, well, then you can actually increase it because, even though you're letting off less water locally, it's overlapping with that bigger upstream peak, and it actually does happen occasionally. So that comes up. It doesn't come up very often, but that is something that does come up. So. But I think I went over on time here, so.
So Justin, just on that note, we see the board sees these developments come through, and there are always issues of drainage. There's always concerns, and so the majority of them are going to have detention basins, but there would be some in that lower third of a basin, or detention pond, in that lower third of the basin, just like with JBU, where it wouldn't be appropriate to have that detention pond. And it's not because you're not doing your work and looking at the drainage system, it's because that's the way it's best designed, so it doesn't create that high peak as far as the peak flow and increase that peak flow off of that property.
That's exactly right.
But they still struggle with a few things. If you go to the northwest corner of the walking trail, and you could see where their drainage, where even what drainage they had, it ruts it up. As we add more hard service, even those being connectivity paths or whatever, you could see Mother Nature's finding her own way to work around those things. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that whole area through there is in the floodplain, so we put trails through there. We know it's going to flood, but
in the retention ponds, and we've talked about safety, but the other thing, I think Reed and I think it's still on topic, at least for me. We went out to Sager, and so we started looking at some different things that they did out there. So these, let's use the one off Washington Street that sits behind Steve Hill's house. Steve's, the big one there, that I think it ended up discharging by the new facility we bought, right? So eventually it makes its way across Lincoln Street by the revenue office. So with that really massive one up there, and we clear cut it down, is in an application like that, and it's unsightly, and Philip and some staff was there, and we talked about, but does certain vegetation help hold or filtrate that water?
Yes. I know that we've done some wetland mitigation, like south of the soccer field, for instance, in that area where it was meant to hold. Actually, I think they put berms there, and it's supposed to hold a certain amount of water. I think, the idea is that there are certain native plants that go in there, and the water gets soaked into those. I don't know if, like in a detention basin, we're supposed to be in and drain within 48 hours if you get that much uptake.
I don't know either.
But if you get those situations where you can hold it long term, definitely, yeah.
Have you done some of that vegetation over in the addition off of Sherry Whitlock between Dogwood and 43, where we've been to see some drainage issues over there? It seems like you and I have talked about that, and the vegetation sometimes can get a little overgrown and unsightly.
So Justin, talk a little bit about the idea of vegetation. The concept that Director Burns was talking about, I think, is the vegetation. The other thing for vegetation is to help filter the runoff. And so I'm going to throw you that pitch and you take it from there.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a water quality effect of vegetation in certain areas, and they say like cattails are actually great. They'll actually soak up nutrients out of the water. A lot of it, the nitrogen and phosphorus that we have issues with, and when it gets down to Sager Creek and the Illinois River, cattails will uptake it in the water.
And I think it was cattails that's in some of the drainage area along Sherry Whitlock there. It just, sometimes it gets a little overgrown and looks not so nice.
So that's the kind of the balance, and you want to get that out of there, but then where's that line at? And I think we've kind of reset it out there for the time being, so we'll have to kind of
yes,
maybe.
it is now. Yeah.
That's the exact conversation we had at the golf course, was what is that balance?
Right.
And how do we educate people? It's like, it reminds me of the trash cans, and don't overfill your trash cans, and no matter what you do, you're never gonna, certain residents that just aren't gonna get it. But at the end of the day, the other conference RWP did virtually was we all live downstream. And I think for us, and I'll speak of Ward 2 again, because as we go out towards Gates, Lazy Boy has a massive retentioning pond. That was on the master green space plan, that sort of thing. We're starting now as we build and build. We've got to educate people. There are ways to maintenance it and make it look better, but at the end of the day, there has to be that vegetation so we're responsible. I mean, we are responsible.
Well, and I know the idea, some that were experiencing some of the flooding, especially in that area, looked at the vegetation as being part of the reason for it. They thought there's so much overgrowth there, it's got to be backing things up, So, yeah, education would probably be helpful, but also if there is a way to, come to that balance. And I think we are there now,
And I think that's it. The idea of, clear-cutting the detention pond and keeping it completely bare of major vegetation, well, then it works great, but then the water that we release is more polluted.
Right.
And with water quality standards, we are trying to filter some of that, and where that exact balance is the struggle at times. And I think we're getting better at it. We let that one grow, I think, too much, and it was full of cattails. But it is this attempt to try to say, one, we've got, Justin, I'm gonna put you on the spot. How many detention ponds does the city maintain in the city?
I'd say 30 or 40 probably. There's a lot.
So trying to keep them cut is one thing, and trying to let some of that vegetation grow up will improve the quality of the runoff, but we can't just ignore it and let it grow up, because then it doesn't have the volume that it needs when there is the 100-year storm.
And to the water quality point, in the new drainage manual, there is a water quality section, and I think that I forget the exact numbers. I want to say that that first inch of rainfall is where you get 90% of the sediment and pollutants running off of a parking lot or anything, and because that's where you get that first flush. So on the newer ponds, we actually we modify the outlet structure. Sometimes we have a little berm. Sometimes we have like a small opening. But the idea is you hold that first inch, and it's supposed to slowly let it drain down, and you let any sand or sediment or anything drop out into the basin before it can go downstream. So that wasn't done on some of those older basins, but on the newer ones that should be done. And we're actually looking at trying to retrofit some of those older ones with that. So that'll help out with it. And you can maybe get a little more balance of water quality without the tall plants with that implementation.
Right. Okay.
Thank you, Justin. Any other questions from the directors? If there are not, again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will adjourn this workshop. We will reconvene at 6:30 for our regular board meeting. Thank you. call to order this meeting of the Siloam Springs Board of Directors for August 3rd, 2021. Roll call.
Carroll.
Here.
Allen.
Here.
Chrysler.
Here.
Hunt.
Here.
Burns.
Here.
Smiley. Sappington.
Here.
If you will, please stand with me as Director Smiley leads us in a word of prayer. Remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Dear Heavenly Father, we are thankful for so many blessings you have given our community and for the opportunity to come together and serve our city. We ask that you give us the ability to make wise and careful decisions in the best interest of our citizens. We pray that you keep our community safe and healthy, and that you will watch over our community, our nation, and all those that serve us wherever they may be. In Jesus' name, amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. At this time, I would like to ask anyone that is present to please silence any electronic devices that you might have with you. Thank you for doing that. The next item is public input. At this time, the public may address the Board of Directors regarding any item on the consent agenda or any city business not listed on the board's regular agenda. Is there anyone here that would like to address the board at this time? Okay, if there is not, we will move on. The next is our presentations by Chief Gilbert.
Hi, Alan Gilbert, Chief of Police, Siloam Springs Police Department. Thank you for the opportunity to bring our new officers up to be able to meet you, and you to get to meet them. COVID protocols have kind of heightened over the last few weeks, so their graduation was canceled. So everyone at the police academy or the police department, we weren't able to go there and attend their graduation. So I thought this would be an opportunity for us to recognize them. Both are Marine Corps veterans, both served in the Marine Corps, very proud of them. Cole Ellison, to my right, finished second in academics at the academy. That's something that's very, very hard to do. So I was very proud of him. Callahan was class leader. And what that is they pick a person when they first come into the academy, and just from their leadership quality, they pick you as a team leader, and you're basically charged the entire time with giving orders, making sure things are done daily. When I went to the academy, I changed class leaders 3 or 4 times. Connor stayed class leader and graduated class leader the first time in Siloam Springs history. So I'm very proud of both of them. I wish I could find about 10 more like them. So again, I would like to introduce you to Cole Ellison and Connor Callahan. Cole Ellison is married, his wife Raquel, and daughters Hazel and Collins. And then Collar, did I say that right?
Flip-flop, you got it backwards.
Hazel and Collins. He threw me off because he spells it different than we did in Mississippi. So, but again, Connor Callahan, I'm sorry, that's what I did wrong.
Yeah, there you go.
See, I always mess up, so you guys feel good about this. As the guys are making fun of me, they say, "Can you read your chicken scratching up there?" And I said, "I made notes, so I'm not going to mess up this time." But I'm sorry. Cole's wife is Megan, and then Connor's wife is, we'll get this right, is Raquel. And his family's here today, so I appreciate them driving up and being able to just honor. I'm very honored to have them as part of the police department. So again, I'm just very proud. So thank you for the opportunity, and you see their faces, and or a little half of them at least. But I think they're going to be a big asset to our police department. I just want to welcome to our family and to the police family. So congratulations, guys, on your graduation. They both asked me if they had to do speeches. I'll say, yeah, at least 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And let me say welcome to Siloam Springs. to both you and your families. And thank you for choosing Siloam Springs as a place to serve. We appreciate that. Welcome. All right. Next is our consent agenda. Item A, workshop minutes from July 20, 2021. Item B, regular meeting minutes, July 20, 2021. Item C, Memorandum of Understanding, Siloam Springs School District, School Resource Officers, Police Department for 167-951-77. Item D, Resolution 3321, Significant Development Permit, Beehive Enterprises LLC, 22,000 Highway 16, Timberline Business Park. Item E, Resolution 3421, Final Plat Development Permit, Faulkner Addition, 21,000 to 22,000 block of Davidson Road. Item F, Resolution 3521, Preliminary Plat Development Permit, Bellevue Addition, 813, Arkansas Highway 16. Item G, Resolution 3621, Preliminary Plat Development Permit, Castlewood Addition, 22,000 block of Davidson Road. Item H, Resolution 3721, Special Use Development Permit, Short-Term Rental, 300 Cortez Drive. Item I, Resolution 3821, Special Use Development Permit, Short-Term Rental, 302 East Jefferson Street. Item J, Resolution 3921, Special Use Development Permit, Short-Term Rental, 400 South Mount Olive Street. Item K, Resolution 4021, Special Use Development Permit, Short-Term Rental, 714 West University Street. That is the complete agenda for the consent. Do I have anyone that would like to make a comment at this time, directors? Anything you want pulled, or yes, David?
Madam Mayor, I would like to pull letter G. G as in go.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to
Yes.
pull item F.
F. Thank you. Anyone else? If there is not, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as approved or as presented, removing items G and F?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Wiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes?
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington.
Yes.
Motion is approved. So Director Allen, item G, which is the resolution 3621. Do you have a question for that
Yes.
one? Yes, sir.
In our packet, we had a letter from Mr. Charles Yancey asking about a potential fence being built, privacy fence on the part of this property that borders his property, in that it looks like the property that's already been approved on one side had given an update that they would pledge to have a 6-foot high privacy fence. And he asked in the planning department for them to ask this gentleman that's developing this to do the same. And I called Mr. Yancey, and he said no one from planning had called him, and that one of the planning commissioners at the planning meeting had tried to address this question, but they had already gone on to the next topic, and therefore they could not come back to this, which also kind of addresses a problem I have, in that I know we have rules, but rules can be suspended, and if we are trying to help the public and answer questions to the public, then why, if a planning commissioner asked to address something, could they not go back and do that? It's frustrating to hear that. But I'd like to know if there is anything that has been brought up to this developer and what the answer is.
Ben, could you address that for us, please?
Ben Rhodes, Senior Planner. Yes, we received the letter from Mr. Yancey, and I forwarded that on to the Planning Commission. He didn't call me directly about it. And so following our procedure, when we receive letters, we don't normally call out on letters. We just put them in with the packet as public comment and leave it to the commission to make any decisions regarding that information.
Thank you, Ben.
Can we ask the developer tonight what the plan is?
Yes, I believe we can. Is Ron? State your name and address for us, please.
Yes, ma'am. Ron Homer, Civil Engineering, 701 South Mount Olive, project representative. Owner-developer's not here at this time. They're aware of the request. They're still trying to work through the feasibility analysis of all this, and with the off-site street and water improvements that are required to develop this, as in paving Davidson Road the entire length. They haven't come to the point where they can say yes, they will be able to do that. Highly likely that when the project's developed, each individual house will have a wood fence put up, but at this point, it's not guaranteed the developer will commit to do that.
I just wanted us to recognize it and make sure that your guy had to acknowledge that he had gotten the letter and acknowledged it, because it doesn't say that it went to him. It said it went to our planning division. So I wanted to make sure your people knew about it.
Right. I made sure they got it.
Okay.
Actually, they got it before I had a chance to talk to them. They found it online.
Okay. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Ron. Is there anyone else on item G? If not, do I have a motion to approve item G, resolution, I'm sorry?
My name is Jeff Farmer. I live at 21923 Davidson Road, just down the road, about 3 acres away from this addition right here. And what I wanted to state, well, I may have a question too, but with the dirt work that's going on Mission Hills, which is just right next to me, south of my property, and with the gravel road, Davidson Road being gravel, and what we read in here about the easements, they was not going to, well, let me get back to this. Can't forgive me, I'm not used to talking in front of a lot of people, so forgive me just if I trip over my own tongue here, but the staff report that I took off the internet right here has got, I guess the applicant has asked for city services where Carroll Electric is at right now, plus city water, but this property is outside the city limits. So my question is, if the mission statement that's in here, if the requirements for the road being worked over up to county standards, being paved as it's described here in this report, does the city have any kind of is it possible for the city to pull let's say water rights or water service or whatever from this development or whatever, in case that stuff doesn't get done? And if it doesn't get done, is there something that I can go to the county with as far as paving the road or whatever, getting it? Because I don't know that we could stand much more dirt from the Mission Hills addition that's being built, plus the dirt road out in front of Davidson. So that's my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer.
Let me ask it, did I understand, I was confused a little. Is Mr. Farmer asking if we as a city can require the developer, is the developer supposed to be doing the road, and if he doesn't do the road, then he won't get our utilities? Is that what the question was?
That is kind of what I was understanding, is that.
David, I'm
Mr. Farmer.
forgive me,
That's all right.
Okay.
Go ahead, Joe.
Inside the report right here,
Right.
it gives statement of bringing the county road, which is outside the city limits,
Right.
up to county standards and paving it with a shoulder on it. And I'm just saying that, is there anything that, let's say that this being outside the city limits, if this august body has had, I mean, do you have the right to actually, have a say or whatever in any of this stuff that goes on with the
Within our
construction?
planning zone, so yes.
Yeah, and
Yes.
so that was my question in a roundabout way, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't know, do we have that right?
Philip?
If I may, the city does have that right. Within our planning jurisdiction, we have the right to adopt a land use plan and a master street plan. So the requirement for the developer to bring up Davidson Road to the minimum standards per the master street plan is part of the ability that a city has in its territorial jurisdiction. So Ben can speak to this maybe in a little bit more detail, but as far as the preliminary plat goes, you get that approval, and then you put all the infrastructure in before you get the final plat, or you put up the cash to do the final plat. So one of those two things will have to happen before they can start building houses there, to either build that road to the minimum standards or put up cash to guarantee that the road's going to be put up to minimum standard, or a bond or something along those lines, before any houses start being built, if that hopefully answers your question.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Philip.
Any other questions on that? Do I have a motion then to approve item G, Resolution 3621?
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. I believe Carol made the motion. Roll call?
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Bristler,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Staffington,
Yes.
Smiley.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Next, item F. Marla?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I had a couple of questions. I wanted to know what caused the increase from 64 to 88 lots with the issue of helping the drainage. And I wanted to see if this was going to cause any of the Lewis Circle issues to remain or get worse, or is it going to help improve if they improve the drainage? And also, I was concerned about the length of roads for the fire department, since there's just one way in and one way out.
Justin?
Justin Bland, city engineer. I could definitely help you on the first two. So yeah, as I understand it, so this property, I mean, Lewis Circle is kind of in a low area, and we kind of approach this with, we got to help out that situation. We definitely can't make it worse, but we're going to try to help it out. So in order to do that, what we discovered is that really the only feasible way is to put about 1,000 foot of offsite pipe to drain this site to the east. And once we worked through the process and came to that conclusion, the developer came back and said that, because of this offsite expense, they needed to up their lot count to kind of balance out the cost, basically. So that's the reason for, as I understand it, from the difference in lots. And there's representatives here that can speak to that as well if you'd like. But the point about the Lewis Circle is that was all done with Lewis Circle in mind. So basically, we're not going to build that up. We're going to keep it low so that Lewis Circle can drain to the north like it currently does and get out of there.
Is it going to cause any issues trying to reroute the direction from 16?
Well,
The corner.
So I believe there's a table in there that kind of shows the impact. There's pros and cons. One thing is that it's going to reduce what drains to this Highway 16 412 intersection. So it's going to help that issue. I don't have them off the top of my head, but there is going to be a slight increase where the water flows over Highway 412, where I want to call for FFO, but it's a different furniture company now. But where it crosses that culvert, I think it was like 1% increase in the 100-year, and then varying storms for that. So there will be a slightly more chance of, it overflowing there, but it will help at 412 and Highway 16.
Thank you, Justin.
Marla, any other questions?
I wanted to address the issue about the length of the road for fire safety. And with it just being one direction in and out.
Ben?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Ben Rhodes, Senior Planner. Actually, there's two ways in and out. There's one off of Highway 16, but if you go on the very back of the subdivision, there's a second stub out that will connect into the Somerset addition, which is already well underway. So once the final plat comes in, we'll ensure that both of those connections are made. So there's not just a single way in and one way in and out, but they'll have multiple ways in and out of the subdivision. So.
The length of the roads within there, you know, from the entrance, you know, because we've got like a limit of, 750 feet that, can you explain how that was measured on this one?
Yeah, that would apply in cases where there's a cul-de-sac or a dead end. They're not measured in cases where there's a secondary way in and out. So it's basically considered part of a continuous grid. It's not considered a cut-off subdivision because there's a second way in and out. So then we're not measuring, you know, the no outlet street.
All right, thank you, Ben.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. Anyone else? Do I have a motion to approve item E, resolution 35-21?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Next on our agenda is the regularly scheduled items. First is item L, Ordinance 21-14, third reading, annexation of 37.44 acres, 15,000 block of Arkansas 59 Highway. Ben?
Yes, thank you again, Madam Mayor, members of the board. Let's get to the right spot here, my notes. So yes, this is the third reading of the annexation, the 15,000 block of Highway 59. This is again for 37.44 acres going to the C2 zone for commercial. Since the second reading, staff has not received any additional comments, and we stand ready for any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address Ordinance 21-14? If there is not, directors? There being none, do I have a motion to approve Ordinance 21-14 for suspending the rules and reading title only?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Rissler,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Philip?
Ordinance number 21-14, an ordinance accepting the annexation of certain territory described at the 1500 block of Arkansas 59 Highway to the city of Siloam Springs, Arkansas, and assigning the same to a ward.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to adopt Ordinance 21-14?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt. Roll call.
Allen,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler.
Yes.
Motion is
Does
approved.
that go to Ward 3?
I'm not sure what ward that goes in. Motion is approved. Ordinance 21-14 is adopted. Next is item F, Ordinance 21-16, to be placed on the first reading, amending Section 102-21 of the City Municipal Code, rezoning from R2 and R3 to R4, 610 West Tahlequah Street. Ben?
Yes, thank you again, Madam Mayor and members of the board. For your consideration is a rezoning to R4 property located at 610 West Tahlequah Street. This is north of Bob Henry Park near the existing Quaker townhomes. The rezoning is for the whole lot that was recently consolidated into a single lot. There currently are 2 zones on the property, that being the R2 and R3 zones. The proposal will allow for the existing quadplex, which was built in the 1980s, to be brought into conformity with the zoning. And here is the future land use map. You see that the whole area is designated as brown, which is the mixed use, which allows for multifamily housing as well as some commercial. And here you see the site. This is looking to the north. As you can see, there's a large open area behind the existing quadplex here. This area will be developed for another similar quadplex project. We did receive a significant development permit for this yesterday, which is currently under staff review. Staff and the Planning Commission looked at this, and we are recommending approval with no conditions, and we are available for any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to comment on Ordinance 21-16? If there is not, directors?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
if there aren't any questions.
Yes, there are apparently no questions, so do you want to make
I
a
move
motion?
that we place ordinance number 21-16 on its first reading, suspending the rules and reading by title only.
Do I have a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes?
Hunt,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Allen.
Yes.
Philip?
Ordinance number 21-16, an ordinance amending section 102-21 of the Siloam Springs Municipal Code City Zoning Map, rezoning from R2 and R3 to R4, property located at 610 West Tahlequah Street.
Thank you. Next is item N, Ordinance 21-17, first reading, amending City Municipal Code, Chapter 102, Zoning, and Chapter 82, Sanitation, Private Drives. Ben?
Yes, thank you again, Madam Mayor and members of the board. Before you is a code update to the planned development zone with respect to private driveways within that zone. The proposal is to allow for sanitation vehicles and police patrols to use these private drives. The driveways under consideration are those found within a planned development, not drives for individual homes or businesses. An example of a driveway as this would be one servicing an apartment complex. The current rules in the PD zone prevent the use of sanitation vehicles on privately owned driveways, so the updated provisions will allow for the roll carts to be picked up in the development rather than a single collection place for all the roll carts on the access road, which, as you would imagine, would block traffic for considerable amount of time if there are many units within that development. So the current rules also prevent routine police patrols on these private drives. Again, this is only in the PD zone when this is all happening. So staff is proposing to remove these specific restrictions for the PD zone's private drives. To balance out this change, we are suggesting an update to the rules within Chapter 82, this is the sanitation code, on the minimum driveway standards so that any proposal must be approved by the sanitation superintendent. And again, that would be to ensure that if there is a development in the, that has substandard driveways, we would want trash trucks to be able to navigate those safely and effectively. So looking specifically at the code changes that are proposed, you see the red is what's proposed to be deleted out of Chapter 102. So you can see this is the section on private drives and specifically saying what the city will not do on those private drives, and we're crossing out the trash limb and recycling pickup and also the police patrols, as I was discussing. And then here is the excerpt from Chapter 82 on the solid waste. And again, I won't read through all that, but it's essentially saying that the trash superintendent will check these driveways, ensure that they have the minimum standards for their purposes. So in summary, we believe that these changes will allow for better development outcomes in the planned developments, which want to make use of private drives rather than dedicating a new street for city maintenance. Staff and the Planning Commission are recommending approval, and we stand ready for any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address or make comments on Ordinance 21-17? If there is not, directors, any comments or questions?
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Ben, you mentioned in your staff report that the city staff was recently made aware of this issue. I'm just curious, was this a citizen concern or a landlord concern or the sanitation department concern? Where did this come from?
No, that's a good question. We had a development proposal. It never surfaced as something that went through Planning Commission, but it was just initial inquiries. And when we were reviewing the development proposal, it was in a PD zone or proposed PD zone. It became obvious that when we started applying that section of the code, that we said, well, we can't have sanitation vehicles come into this development, and that was going to cause big issues, on the road where this development was planned, because the sanitation vehicle would have to stop on the road and pick up 20, 30 different units that would all have to be rolled out to that road, and we just realized there needed to be something done to address that.
So is this going to be retroactive for current plan development or just future?
This would be apply for future. I don't think there's a situation that I'm aware of where this would impact the current plan development.
Oh, okay. Okay. And so if this is, for instance, an apartment complex, like you said, each apartment resident will be furnished with the trash bin, and they will put it in front of their apartment?
That's correct. With this change, yes.
Okay. I would think that would be helpful even to the residents, that they don't have to go to a central location. The only issue, and I don't know that we have any control over that, is if they don't bring it back and we end up with lots of trash cans out in this one area. But that remains to be seen. I would think this would be an easier thing for the citizens as well. But
if I may, Ben, I'm not sure that it would be for the apartments.
Okay.
I mean, the one that came through was a single-family detached issue.
Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but from a apartment developer, I could probably still do a collection bin somewhere where the residents could take it. It wouldn't be a requirement that I would have to provide that individual trash container, the individual blue bin to every apartment. Because once you do that with apartments and you're talking, an 8-plex and you've got 8 of them right there in front of you. But specifically the one that came up that Ben referenced was more of a single-family detached, where they would have to take it down the block and put it out on the collector street, which is the street that Ben was talking about. That's the one.
Well, that makes more sense. I thought you had mentioned something about an apartment complex, and I'm thinking it's pretty standard for an apartment complex to have a centralized bin, but
I did mention in my comments apartment complex. That was just to give an example, because I don't think people, when you say private drive, there might be some confusion as to what we're talking about. So that wasn't to say that that particular project triggered the need for this code change. Philip is absolutely correct. It was more of a single-family detached project on private drives.
So in cases like future apartment complexes, it will probably be more standard the way it is now. Okay.
Correct. Okay. Yeah.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Ben. Couple of questions. This was the gated community for the seniors okay. So is this going to cause more work, the need for more trucks or anything like that, if we are able to go and pick up within, a community we're not reaching right now?
I don't believe it would create more work. It would be similar to just a regular subdivision that gets built with single-family homes, where the individual homeowners have a roll cart that they put out in front of on their curb, and the trash truck comes by and picks up the vehicles or it's not the vehicles, but the bins one by one. So I would probably posit that it would be more work the way that we have now without the code change, because the vehicle would then have to stop and individually kind of pick up every single one while blocking traffic for up to 30 minutes on a major road, because there's no place for them to pull over. So this kind of makes more sense, I think, from a staff and operational perspective. Yep.
Do we have very many of these places in existence right now that we're going to start using this updated code for?
Again, this is for planned development, so those are customized zones. This wouldn't be applied retroactively to existing planned developments, because each planned development is unique to its site and its design. So, but it would greatly assist future developments going down the road, like the one that you were referencing earlier. So,
all right,
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Anyone else? If not, do I have a motion to place ordinance 21-17 on its first reading, suspending the rules and reading title only?
So moved.
Have a motion? Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Stoppington.
Yes.
Wiley.
Yes.
Burns.
Yes.
Hunt.
Yes.
Rissler.
Yes.
Allen.
Yes.
Carroll.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Philip?
Ordinance number 21-17, an ordinance amending Chapter 82 Sanitation and Chapter 102 Zoning of the Municipal Zoning Code with respect to private drives and requirements for the collection of commercial refuse containers.
Thank you. Next item is O, ordinance 21-18, first reading, amending City Municipal Code, Chapter 102 for zoning, body art. Ben?
Yes, thank you again, Madam Mayor and members of the board. Before you is another code update, again to Chapter 102. This update is related to the definition of Use Unit 22 for adult businesses. The proposal amends the title to body art / body modification businesses to where these can, and also where these can be located. Per your guidance, we opened up this use to a larger area, allowing them by right in the I2 zone and as a special use in the C2 zone district. So here you see the proposed text from the ordinance. The changes are again shown in red. We changed the title as other adult businesses are handled in Use Unit 23. We also expanded the definition as shown by what's been underlined. Below the text, you see in the chart what is being changed in the different zones. Again, a special use in C2 and permitted by right in I2. And you saw these before, but just showing them again one more time, these are the locations of the I1, I2 zones. This is where these will be allowed by right without any special permits or anything. And then with the red added, those are the locations they can be allowed as a special use permit. And with that, Planning Commission and staff are recommending approval of the update as presented, and we are available for any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to comment on ordinance 21-18? There is not. Directors?
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I asked for this to be brought to the staff, and I appreciate your work on it, Ben. And I know that it will help when we get some people questioning if they can have the type of that they wanted to have. It was just, industrial was just too too dirty of a location for something that needed to be clean, and I appreciate this a bunch.
Thank you, Marla. Anyone else?
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Well, I think I said before, and I'll say it again, you know, I'm tired of the baby steps. I appreciate the work. I'm gonna be a no vote, because I think it needs to be in some of these historical buildings. These type of shops are about environment and atmosphere, and the majority of them nowadays are appointment only. Just like an attorney downtown is appointment only, works 2 days a week. The prices that they charge, I think we're living in a stone age when we think of what that is. And I know that labels me. I think it's a generational gap, and I think it's just a different thought process. I will go back to body piercing. There are facilities in town that you can't regulate what they're piercing, but in our purity of our minds, we like to think it's ears. And I think in Siloam, it makes us feel good. So I think this will visit, maybe not in my tenure on the board, but this will come back up in a few years, and I hope we get it in some of these locations downtown that need to be filled in. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Director Burns, awesome. I agree totally. I think that's wonderful to have the atmosphere of the downtown for this, and so it may be something that we want you to look at as a special use in C1 as well.
You? Anyone else? If not, do I have a motion to place Ordinance 21-18, first reading, suspending the rules, reading title only?
So moved.
Thank you. Do we
I'll
have a
second.
second? We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Wiley. Yes. Burns.
No.
Hunt.
Yes.
Chrysler.
Yes.
Allen.
Didn't hear what you said. Yes. Sounds like something.
Carroll.
Yes.
Tappington.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Philip?
Ordinance number 21-18, an ordinance amending Chapter 102 zoning code of the municipal code with respect to use unit 22 for body modification businesses.
Thank you, Philip. Next item is our staff reports. And that will be you, Philip.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As I previously reported to the board, the Broadband Advisory Committee has been meeting since late April to look at various municipal broadband business models and to try to discuss what the broadband needs are of the city based on the board's previous discussions. At their July 29th meeting, the committee reviewed a draft of an RFP for a feasibility study. And based on that review, the committee is recommending to the board that the city proceed with publishing the RFP and funding a study for a consultant to do the feasibility study. You have a copy of the RFP in your packet. The way it's drafted is that a feasibility study would include a review of the broadband or a design for a broadband network and a cost estimate for development of that. It would review business cases or develop a particular business case, but also analyze the other various business models that are out there. It would provide alternatives for financing. It would include a statistically valid survey of residents and also an online survey of residents and businesses. And the way we've drafted it, also some individual stakeholder interviews to try to not just get the statistically valid responses, but also just try to get some additional input from businesses and stakeholders within the community. If that goes forward, then the committee, the Broadband Advisory Committee, the way it's written, would use the scoring that's drafted in the RFP to score the various responses. And the way the RFP works is every response would be in two parts. It would be the narrative addressing all the other issues, and then a separate sealed response would be the bid. And the way the process would work would be the committee would review all of the responses and score them before they opened up all the bids, and then they would have to score that and then try to figure out which one is the best consultant to recommend to the board to hire. That then recommendation then would come before the board. Based on a preliminary discussion with a couple of consultants, we expect the feasibility study to range in that $50,000 to $65,000 price range. So that's the recommendation of the Broadband Committee. I believe Director Ressler may wish to speak to it, but I believe the committee has gone about as far as they can to the point of looking at the various business models that are out there, talking to various other municipalities that have done this, reviewing what has worked and what hasn't worked for some municipalities. But the next step for them is, in their belief, is the feasibility study. And I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will ask you, directors, what is your direction to our administrator? We'll begin with you, Mindy.
Well, I appreciate that the committee has done what they've done so far, and I am in support of requesting this proposal.
Director Burns?
Philip, in your administrator's report, can those monies be used from the American Rescue Plan Act? Is that a possibility?
It's potentially possible. However, excuse me, the interim final rules are still out there, and the way it looks like, the way it reads today, is that money is still limited for broadband in areas that are underserved or not served by high-speed internet, defined as 25 download and 3 megs upload, which we have that ability. So if that stays that way and they don't raise that definition, we might not be able to use those monies. We do, I'll speak a little bit more to that in my official administrator's report, and there's some other ways that we're looking at trying to do that, but officially using that money today, I don't believe that we'll be able to.
I'll say one thing, that is the power of a lobbyist, and I'm on board with whatever we need to do. Thank you.
Director Sappington?
I think that it needs to be done.
Thank you. Absolutely.
I want to say thank you to the people that are on the Broadband Committee, because they were very direct in their questions, and they had some awesome questions, and they were honest. And so this wasn't a decision to create an RFP just because everybody came together and said, oh, yeah, let's create an RFP. There was some in-depth conversation that went on because they're concerned for the community. And so, and I really like that Philip added on the RFP, the financials, that we can look at grants and stuff, because there are grant opportunities, I hope, out there that we can use to take this even further. But yes, I'm for it.
Thank you. Reed?
Please continue.
Thank you.
I am in favor of this, and I really appreciate the surveys that we're going to get back.
Thank you. David?
I appreciate Philip setting up this committee and going at it wholeheartedly, and actually I appreciate him just being open-minded to bring this whole idea back, because it's a potential additional revenue source, and I think it's a great idea that this committee is wanting to. Now, I got to tell you, I'm not one for consultants, throwing a consultant at everything. This is obviously one that we need a professional to bring back recommendations of what we can do, what different ideas are there. And so I think it's a great idea. I really appreciate the RFP. I don't know why we don't do RFPs on everything, but this is 100%.
Thank you, David. Philip?
I think I have my marching orders.
I believe so.
We can have a discussion one day about RFPs and RFQs and bids and all that, but it's an interesting dilemma. As Director Ressler said, there was very interesting discussions about how this is going to play out and what's the real need. Is it the service? Is it revenue? And the committee, I'm just not, I mean, I'm not part of the committee. I'm trying to help maybe shepherd them. But they think this is the right way to go. And we have probably at least maybe 6 or 7 consultant firms that we've already identified that have done things like this. Some of them have experience in Arkansas, some of them do not. But we'll proceed on. As you noticed in the RFP, it's got some blanks for dates, and so I have to figure out and work those out to get it out there and get it published. But we'll start on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, GRDA.
So, thank you, Madam Mayor. As I've previously reported, GRDA incurred a significant extraordinary cost in energy cost in the February winter storm, as did all utilities across the South, for that matter. And all utilities have been working to try to figure out exactly what those costs are and how they're going to recoup those costs through their various customers. So, as I stated previously, GRDA's extraordinary cost in the February storm was over $102 million, over and above what they would normally pay for energy in February. GRDA looked at the total amount of energy that they produced and allocated out, sold out wholesale to and retail to their various customers, and allocated a proportional share to all of their customers of that $102 million. They generated, or the consumption by GRDA customers in February was over 592 million kilowatt hours. Siloam Springs' portion of that was just over 22 million kilowatt hours. That's the amount that we consumed in February, which was 3.77%. So our share of that $102 million is 3.77%, or $3,855,758. GRDA is going to propose to their board that they provide 3 options to their wholesale customers to pay it back. One is to pay it in full with no carrying cost. One is to pay it over a 12-month period with no carrying cost. For Siloam Springs, that would be over $321,000 a month for 12 months. Or pay it over 120 months or 10 years with carrying cost. The carrying cost has not been determined at this time because GRDA is trying to figure out what their wholesale customers are going to do, so they'll know how much they're going to go and try to get a 10-year loan, because they have to refurbish or replenish their reserves, because they paid that $102 million out of reserves. So they have to have that reserve in case there's another significant winter storm like the one in February. So they asked all their customers to try to give them or provide them with a option that you want to choose by September. There's a little bit I wrote in my staff report, I think, that the repayment plan would be beginning first of the year. GRDA would prefer to have it the first of the fourth quarter of this year, so that's still up in the air a little bit. But they would like to know by September which option their customers are going to want to choose, and if you don't choose an option, they're going to put you into the 10-year repayment plan. I asked Christina Pittrich, the finance director, to give me an idea at a 10-year loan on that $3.8 million at 2 or 2.5%, how much would it add to? And it was about $500,000. So based on that, and based on some of the comments that we heard at the last board meeting when I brought this, just basically shared this issue at the beginning, we started working on a plan to share that cost with our city customers. So the first thing that staff did was to divide up all the customers within the city into the various categories that are at the bottom of that first page. Residential all electric, commercial all electric, small power, and large power. And that's basically the division of rates that we have within the electric side of things. So what we did based on that was to take that 22 million kilowatt hours and determine what portion of that, what amount of that was used by those various classes, and then take that percentage and apply it to the $3.8 million. So at the top of the second page, you can see that the residential use used 22.41% of that 22 million kilowatt hours and so forth. Residential all electric, barely 10%. Commercial, almost 7%. Commercial all electric was less than 0.5%. Small power was just over 9%. Large power over 51%. So then we attributed an equitable amount of that $3.8 million to those different categories. So again, on the residential side, I won't read them all, but $864,000 is that portion, going all the way down to large power. It's over $1.9 million is their portion. So at that point, it was a question of how to equitably attribute that over all the residential. So for the residential, there's over almost 5,500 residential meters. So we just divided that 864,000 by that almost 5,500 meters to come up with an average for every residential account. We did the same thing on the residential all electric. There's only just over 1,100 accounts there. For commercial and commercial all electric, we created blocks based on 2,000 kilowatt hours, 4,000 kilowatt hours, 6,000 kilowatt hours, and then within those blocks we did the same thing. We averaged that. And the reason we did blocks is because there's such a huge disparity in the commercial side of consumption, from 100 kilowatt hours on one commercial user to over 15,000 kilowatt hours on another commercial user. There's not that kind of spread on the residential side, if that makes sense. For small power, we created blocks, but they're much broader because they use that much more power. They're at 10,000 kilowatt hour blocks. And then for large power, because it is such a large number and there's a small number of actual large power users, there's only 38 accounts, we did each individual bill. So when you look at the last table there, you will see that large spread because we based it on their individual bill in February. So the idea that we are proposing is to recommend that we pay it off in 1 year, but charge the electric users their proportionate share over a period of 3 years. So if we started charging the electrical consumer in, let's say, in January of 2022, at the end of 2022, the city would have collected a third of that $3.8 million. We would have paid that monthly to GRDA, and then borrow from the utility fund the remaining 2/3 and pay that off to GRDA so we don't have any carrying cost, and then continue to bill the consumer for the remaining 2 years at that given rate. I would note that according to the finance department, we're going to have to book this on this year's budget. So per the general accepted accounting principles, you're going to see that $3.8 million liability as a budget amendment in the 2021 budget that Christina does at the end of every year. The last part of that staff report, you will see what that number is for each resident. $4.38, residential all electric $9.46, commercial ranging from $3.60 some odd cents to $73, commercial all electric ranging from almost $5 to $63, depending on which block, small power ranging from about $60 to $454, and then large power ranging from $22 to just over $10,000 a month. But that is providing, that's the share of, as the $4.38, that's my share of the extraordinary electric cost that is attributed to the city for that February winter storm. I have some slides that I obtained from GRDA to kind of help you understand where that extraordinary cost came from, if you'd like to see them. I didn't put them in the packet. I didn't hand them out. I didn't know if you wanted to go through them or not. I have hard copies here, but that's where we are, and we need some feedback and some discussion as to where the board and how the board would like to address this extraordinary energy cost for the February winter storm.
Philip, so
Madam
we,
Mayor, can
I
I
was
ask a
gonna say,
question?
can we just let each director address that? Would that be okay if we do it that
I'm
way?
sorry.
No, that's fine. So we'll go ahead and start with you, Lisa, and then we'll go around this way, and we'll end with you, Marlo, okay?
I just have a few questions, and I don't know, Philip, this really, I don't know if it would be a question for you, but I think more Judy or Carol or David, I think you guys would know more. In the past, when we've had natural disasters or emergencies, and we used reserved money, did we always have the citizens pay that back? Or, I'm curious, I'm just curious.
Can't hear you, Lisa. I'm sorry.
So anytime we had a natural disaster or an emergency situation due to weather or something like that, and we used reserved money, did we always put the cost back on the citizen?
I don't remember in my time, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor.
Yeah,
I don't remember that we did that. I don't know that we've actually had, I don't know what disaster would be that we went into the reserves, other than maybe the tornado. I'm trying to think, but.
I agree. I don't remember there ever being a time that the city experienced this type of catastrophic event almost that we had to take this kind of money from reserve to recover from that because of the charge being passed on to us.
And that's what I would say. I do not remember anything this significant amount. This is a significant amount.
You mentioned the tornado. Either one of you mentioned the tornado. Did we pass on the tornado cost?
No, I said no. I don't think we did.
I don't think so, but I don't even remember what that cost was, David. I don't think, it was not near this.
I think it was over $1 million.
The tornado bill was over $1 million,
Yeah.
but it wasn't related to energy consumption. It was related to damage to public facilities. I mean, it's.
But it was a natural disaster.
It was a natural disaster, no question about that.
I've been asked by citizens that we pay our electric bill and some of that money goes into reserve for emergencies. So we're going to pay it again, is their comment. And I guess I understand they're getting the utility out of it, and I understand a natural disaster, it was in God's hands.
And I'm just telling you from the GRDA standpoint, they have what's called, if you look at your bill, every month there's a PCA adjustment, power cost adjustment. And that's the way this really is a power cost adjustment. But they're recognizing it's an extraordinary power cost adjustment. It's GRDA refers it as to PCA-X because the cost of natural gas skyrocketed in some cases, and there were a number of other issues. But it is the question of how to proceed.
I do like the idea of taking a year because we get to keep our interest. I think somebody mentioned it. I like paying it off, but I like keeping our interest as long as we can with any money that we have. And so,
Thank you, Lisa. Reed?
I'm good with the direction you're going. I like the earlier payoff or payback in case we do have another natural disaster. We're not trying to pay one off while another one happens, so I like the quickness of it. Thank you.
Carol?
Well, I do like the option B where we pay it off over 12 months and still have no carrying costs. I'm not sure why we would pay it off just right now when we have that opportunity to spread it out. And I do appreciate the way Philip and staff have broken this down and how it would come back into the customers on a monthly rate for for 3 years, even though we're paying it in 1 year, if that's the way we go.
Thank you. David?
I said at the last meeting, I would recommend we pay it out over 12 months because there's no interest charged to us. If the reason that we are wanting to make just one payment is because it's simpler for finance department, I think we should be taking advantage of leaving our money in the bank as long as possible. I'm going to go back to what Brad quoted at the last meeting, and he said, this is why we have reserves. This is why we have money set aside. We have $20 million unrestricted cash. The flood of '74 cost $17 million in 1974 to the city and the businesses and residents of Siloam Springs. There was no passing on of that cost to the public. This is why reserves are set aside. And we'd not be playing catch up on streets and passing on stormwater expenses and natural disaster events if we had been holding on to our reserves. The only reason to be passing on this cost is to hold our cash and make sure our books look great and we're staying on budget, et cetera, et cetera. We have a reserve fund for a reason, and natural disasters is part of that. $4.38 a month for 36 months is $157 over 3 years to our customers. Our customers did not ask for that power adjustment. They did not ask for that natural disaster. GRDA is a private business that can pass on its increased costs to its customers the same as Verizon can, the same as any other company can. We are a municipal government that is nonprofit, and in fact, we are a little odd in that our customers that we could pass the costs on to are actually the shareholders of this city. To expect them to pay when we have the money and could pay it easily, it just doesn't sit well with me, especially when we have people that live week to week and struggle financially. And when we are able to pay this money, but yet we expect to pass it on, and we're now looking at a $1 stormwater drainage fee per month, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. When we built the library, we didn't pass on the cost of the library spread out to every citizen, to their bills, or any other capital project that we've done. So why would we do this? I can just tell you, I'm not going to support the $1 a month for the stormwater, and I'm not going to support this either. This needs to be paid out of reserves. We need to be paying it over 12 months, broken down monthly, with no interest charge to us.
Thank you, David. Mindy?
Okay. When this was first presented to us at our last meeting, I was under the impression that most likely these costs would be, whether we paid up front or not as a city, that citizens would eventually incur the cost to be able to pay back what the city had to pay. That was sort of my understanding. And that's one of the reasons why I mentioned a concern about a storm drainage fee on top of what was possibly going to be additional fees over a period of time for the citizens to pay back this this particular fee. But then when a couple of directors mentioned that's what reserves are for, like Director Burns, and I think a couple others mentioned that, then I started second guessing. And I guess where I'm sort of landing, it wasn't the residents' fault that this happened. It wasn't the city's fault that this happened. It wasn't the companies that are the large power users that over 3 years will pay $360,000 possibly to pay this back if they're paying $10,000 a month, if my math is right there. I guess where I'm leaning is somewhere in between. Maybe sharing the expense between the city, using some reserves, and then using some from the residents. So that's, you can always count on me to come somewhere in the middle. And here I am again.
Thank you, Mindy. Brad?
I'm not in the middle, so make it easy. I liked option A, but it makes sense to try to get some of our percentages back we pay over the 12 months. When we think of catastrophic events, Joplin, Missouri, tornadic activity. Out west, a wildfire, the Camp Fire that consumed a town. You know, that's what's in our minds. This is our catastrophic event. If I dig through the cobwebs on my mind, and it's a deep cobweb, but if we go back to Jim Coral, I think other than leaving us with the Coral Sea and the problems with that, I can recall as a young fireman, I think he was the one that really started kicking off and getting these deep reserves going. And I remember watching the monitors at the firehouse and the board members over time with Moose as the mayor, and these reserves would come up and why we can't dibble into them and why we got to build them up. And today is that day, and as painful as that number is, it is a painful number. My small mind cannot wrap that number, my mind, I just can't wrap around that number that we're going to have to spend, but we are going to spend that. I don't think we need to pass that on to the citizens. We built that over time, and I'm not a fan of that on this particular one, and so I would like to see us pay it over 12 months. Option B, do not pass it on to the citizens. We run a balanced budget, and we put money back in the reserves every year, and with our growth and development, I'm sure over time we will build that back up, and so that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Marla?
Well, I agree with Director Burns. I go for option B. I think that we can keep our money as long as we can and get a little bit of interest off of it. I do not want to charge the citizens. I don't feel it's their obligation to pay extra. It happened. We need to be responsible, take care of it, pay it. $4 doesn't seem like a lot to many, but I work with individuals that $4 can feed them one meal, feed them for a day. I don't see where we need to pass it on to citizens. And like Director Hunt said, if we have a large entity that's paying $10,000 a month, that is unreal. And I don't feel it's right. So option B, we take all of it.
Thank you, Marla. Philip?
Give me 1 second.
Yes, sir.
So, I'm trying to think about what I heard. Give me one other second. What I heard is, Director Ressler, you mentioned used reserves. I didn't hear 100%, 50%. Director Hunt sort of said share. If you were saying share, then I'm sort of like 2, 2, and 3.
I don't want it passed on to the citizens.
Okay, all right. So what I will do is I'll bring back in 2 weeks. I'll keep this option on the table just so you have it to compare with. I'll come back in 2 weeks strictly because of Director Hunt, maybe a 50-50 split so you can see what that is, and then if you take it all out of reserves, where that would come from, and I'll show you those numbers. And then what you likely will have to do is have a strong consensus at that meeting, because I think, well, if you're not going to charge the residents anything, then I don't think you will have to pass any ordinance as it relates to adding a fee to it. But if you decide something different as a group, then we would need to get an ordinance in place at that point. But I'll come back at least with so you can see what it is today, like I proposed it, and then a 50-50 split, and then 100%, and show you what the numbers are, what the Director Allen mentioned, the cash reserve, show you what that is, show you what it would be if you pay it 50% or pay it all. Is that?
Can I throw out something? It sounded like we had 4 actually saying
You did.
Just
all on
do
the
it.
city.
You had 4 saying no pass to the
So-
customer.
so-
I couldn't get mine, I couldn't.
Yeah,
I'm
so
sorry.
if it may not make much sense to do something based on what I was
Okay.
saying.
All right. Let me rephrase that. I'll come back with new numbers.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, directors.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I think it's gonna be a waste of time to, put more numbers together because
agree.
we're pretty adamant about, we want the city to pay for it.
Yes, ma'am, and I would only bring back you the new numbers so that you know what the cash reserves are today and what they will be tomorrow, so that you're not unaware of the drawdown of your cash reserves. And I mean, that's fine, and clearly it's your decision, but I think it's important for you to know if you pull it all out of utility fund that you're gonna draw down the cash reserves to X. And
But
then
our financial statement, our monthly report has that on it.
yes, ma'am. But I
So we
just,
can just draw it from that, you know, the picture. But I understand what you want to do. Bring it back to us, but I don't think there's gonna be any
I-
change of decision.
I don't think so either, but I think it's imperative that I bring back the numbers for the public so that it's in the record, if that's okay.
Madam
Mayor.
Mayor,
Yes.
Philip, there have been some discussions on using some of the reserve or the electrical funds for different projects. Will that change
Yes.
what we're gonna do? Okay, I need to know that. We also, when we're gonna do any bonding, our credit risk is based on what our balance is in our reserves, is that correct?
Depends on the type of bonding that you do, but
Okay.
there's always that. And so, what I want to do is to go sit down with Christina and say, okay, do we pull it out of utility fund? Do we pull it out of general fund? Do we do 50-50? How do, if 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, we had the presentation about trying to accelerate street projects a couple of years down the road. That was part of the reason for the 3-year payback, is that it would not impact if that presentation that Christina originally provided. If we pull it all out of utility fund, it will have an impact on how much you could draw or borrow from the utility fund to accelerate street projects. But I want to go back to the drawing board based on, I mean, the idea was to put something in front of you so you could have some discussion and give us some direction of where you wanted to go. So we'll go back to the drawing board and look at the numbers and come back with a proposal of where we should draw the money and how much should be drawn out of which account and what the impacts of that are.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure thing.
David?
Philip, I liked what you presented to us. You gave us a lot of information and options. But as Mindy pointed out, you had 4 board members who said, we are not in favor of passing this on to the customer. I would like to see how this will affect all the numbers, but we have 20 million in unrestricted cash right now. And I believe 3 years ago, you told me in this room that we had 10 to 11 million that we'd gotten down to on reserves. So it's been a lot less than what we have now on reserves. And spending $3 million out of the city reserves is going to drop us month by month. We're not paying it all in one check, but we're going to drop us. We can see the numbers of what it's going to drop. And I don't believe that I think you heard, as you were saying a moment ago, your marching orders, and I think you heard the adamant feeling of some board members that this is why we have a reserve fund, and I don't believe in going back and redoing the report, massaging the report to try to influence us to change our mind.
Director Allen, that is not what I'm proposing to do.
Okay, that's why I'm saying I don't believe in that, and I'm not saying that's what you're doing. I'm saying I don't believe in that kind of stuff.
No.
That's my feeling in general, so.
What I want to do is to work with Christina.
Yeah.
There are two cash accounts.
Yeah.
Utilities and general fund.
What you were telling Carol, I'm in full agreement with what you're
And that's
talking.
all I want to do.
Yeah.
I mean, if and I'm sorry, I was
Well,
trying to
we
read
need
my-
to know where
Yes,
the money's gonna come from.
I think it's important that you know, $20 million in general fund. I think there's $13 million in the utility fund. And whether it all comes out of one or comes out, 50-50 or whatever it is, what does that do to that fund? And as Director Smiley said, if there is other interest at a later date of borrowing from that fund to do other projects, how does that impact that? That's the only thing I want to bring back at that point.
But as Brad said, this reserve fund will be built back pretty fast, so I'm not worried about that.
And the only other thing that I would say is I would want Christina's input. I might believe, and Christina's not here to tell me I'm wrong, but I might believe that it would be better to make one single payment to GRDA at the end of 12 months so that we're drawing interest on that $3.8 million rather
They'll
than
take
paying
that, yeah.
$380,000 a month or whatever that number was.
Absolutely.
I didn't think that was an option, though. It didn't.
Yeah,
seem like
well, it's
Option
It's
B.
the second option. Oh, no.
it's I mean, I'd have to talk to GRDA, but the second option was pay over 12 months with no carrying cost. And my argument would be, they didn't say necessarily how much we would have to pay, but
Pay
if
$1
I
a
can just
month.
pay it off at the end of 12 months.
Well, I think letter A was, I think they were expecting it to be paid in full now.
Well, we will talk with GRDA. We'll square that off. But with the idea, I presented to GRDA the idea of paying a third of it over 12 months and then making a 2/3 payment at the end of 12 months. And that might be still that's something that we could do so that we're not paying it as great every month and then collecting more interest, as much interest as we can on that money, if that makes sense. So
Your next to last paragraph describing what you just said made a lot of sense on paying 1/3 and then 2/3.
yes,
I mean,
that's
yeah.
And GRDA didn't seem to have an issue with that. So if we choose 12-month payments, they just want some payment every month and then, make sure that at the end of 12 months they get paid in full. So we'll go to work on it. I appreciate your input. It's not an easy discussion no matter what. It's a big bill. But I can, as I told you last time, there are cities in this state that have much fewer electric customers with much bigger bills for the energy cost of the winter storm. And it's been fascinating to try to figure this out. Madam Mayor, if it's no objections, I'll move on with my report.
Yes, sir, I think that's fine.
The June financials are in your board packet. As always, feel free to contact me if you have any questions related to those. On the expenditure that needs to be reported, the electric department spent $31,864 on a 200 kVA pad mount transformers. That's for inventory and maintenance and for new customers. We are under contract for the kayak launch and ADA fishing pier, and the tentative schedule is October, that it would be installed in early October. My original plan was to have the bulkheads installed and the ADA pathways and the ADA parking installed just prior to the installation of the pier. In talking to the consultant or the contractor, he said likelihood the best way to schedule that is to do the bulkheads, let us install the pier, and then immediately come back and build the pathways and the parking so that it's not damaged by their heavy equipment as they're building the pier. So there will be a period of time, not unlike Shawnee, Shawnee, Oklahoma, where there's a bulkhead and it's not ADA accessible, but the pier is there. With respect to the American Rescue Plan Act, the city is in receipt of its first tranche of one of two tranches of monies. So we have received $1,766,876.48. I'm hoping that in 2 weeks we will have a report as to how we think our recommendation to you of how to account for that money and free up some other money that then Director Burns could be earmarked for potential broadband to kick off a broadband program if that's the pleasure of the board. So we'll work on that as a recommendation and something to have a discussion on at a later date. The last thing, as always, is COVID. You will notice that staff is now setting back down here at the lower tables, trying to provide you as much space as possible. I would ask you to let me know if you wish to go back to Zoom meetings now that the governor has made a declaration of a statewide public health emergency, and the legislature today affirmed that public health emergency. Cities do have the right to go back to Zoom meetings. I got the impression last time that you didn't like that, but if that's your desire, we can do that. You see the numbers there that I provided you. Northwest Arkansas is still below 40% fully vaccinated. From June 24th to July 26th, the daily number of active cases per 1,000 residents in Northwest Arkansas increased from less than 1 to over 4. In Benton County alone, it increased from 0.6 to 4.3, pretty much the same numbers in Washington County. The Arkansas Center for Health Improvement finally went back to providing individual cities community case numbers. And so out of that 10-city list that we have previously were tracking last year, we're number 2 on that list with 51 active COVID cases per 10,000 population as of July 26th. Last Thursday, the governor did declare the public health emergency. It's good for 60 days. Everything that I can read and gather, our hospitals are full with COVID patients. The last I heard, as of yesterday, hospitals in Northwest Arkansas set a record for 165 COVID patients in the hospitals. The best count that I can give you at the staff level is we have about 35%. We believe we have about 35% of our city employees that are vaccinated. That's the number of appointments that we made back when the vaccinations first came out for city employees. I can't guarantee that everybody that actually made an appointment actually went and got their shot, but if they did, that's the number, about 35%. We've recently experienced outbreaks within city staff. We have a number of city staff members who are in quarantine and in isolation due to either being exposed or having COVID. And due to Act 1002, which recently became law, cities cannot require the public to wear masks, which you never did. But it's not the public that Act 1002 actually states, it's individuals. So cities, unlike private companies, cannot require masks of their employees. A private company can require their employees to wear masks. Cities cannot. We cannot require our employees to wear a mask. So the only thing that we can do, to my knowledge, is to encourage, as the governor did on Friday, for everyone to get vaccinated, and to encourage those in our staff that aren't vaccinated to get vaccinated. And what I'd like to do, barring no objections of the board, is to offer an additional vacation day to any member of staff who can prove that they have been or will be vaccinated or have been vaccinated within the next 45 days, to try to encourage an increase in the number of staff members who are vaccinated. And then lastly, being that we can't require members of the public to wear a mask when they come to City Hall, I believe it's imperative that we do everything we can to try to protect staff, based on the governor's declaration of a emergency, I want to meet with the fire chief and with City Attorney Jay Williams and other staff members and potentially declare a city emergency for the purposes of limiting public access to various city facilities without appointments, as we did back in March of 2020. The Delta variant is here. It's strong. I believe it's imperative to try to protect staff as best we can. It was a pain to do it last time, but it doesn't mean that we wouldn't have members of the public being able to pay their bills, but we would ask them to pay for City Hall, pay their utility bills online, either through their bank or through the city's online service, drop off a check in the drop box, and if they only had cash, just like we did back in March, we could offer to defer that payment without penalty or without shut-off for a period of time, or make arrangements, call a number, and make an appointment to come in where we can have a, an individual rather than multiple people standing in line in the lobby of City Hall. So that's my report. You have a number of images there from ACI's website and the Health Department's website showing those numbers that I spoke of. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, sir. So we are now to our director's reports. First thing I would like to do is say thank you to Chief Gilbert for introducing our new officers, and to welcome Officer Ellison and Officer Callahan to our police force in Siloam Springs. I look forward to their service with us. Thank you, sir. So with that, now I will move on to our directors. Mindy, we will start with you tonight, please, and we will end with David. If I may ask that you all remember that our administrator is asking for direction from each of you on Zoom meetings and on the day off for our employees that have been vaccinated. So with that, Mindy.
Okay. Question for Philip. Under your COVID update, you say Northwest Arkansas is still below 40% fully vaccinated. I believe the governor on Friday said that Benton County is up over 51%, and it may not be fully vaccinated, but I just wanted to bring that up as sort of an encouragement that apparently Benton and Washington County are over that 50% mark. So we're getting there. So that must be at least partially vaccinated. His numbers must have been partially vaccinated.
It could have been the vaccination. I can't find the county data that the governor had.
Okay. Oh, okay.
I would add also the governor's press conference today. He said within the last 24 hours there's been 30,000 shots provided, so the number has gone up.
Yeah. Okay. Zoom, I could go either way. If we do get to the point where you feel like it's going to be safer for all, I can go either way on that. I do think it would be a good idea to offer that incentive for employees. I would make that retroactive for anybody that already has had a vaccine, so it's not just those going forward. If we do declare the public health emergency, that might make it a little bit more difficult for people to come in and pay. And for those who would be able to pay credit card instead, I think we waive credit card fees for a while. We might want to consider doing that again if that's going to be our main option.
The idea was to follow exactly what we did before.
Exactly. Okay, good. So that I think answers your questions there. Appreciate the discussion that we had tonight about how we're going to pay back that fee. And I appreciate the passion that we have for our citizens. We want to do what's right by them, and I look forward to getting the numbers on how that will impact other things. I think that is very important before we do make our final decision on what route we're going to take there. That's really all I have to say. I will let Director Burns have my remaining time.
Thank you, Mindy. Brad?
Up to a point.
Oh. Read my mind. Yes, on the day off. I prefer no Zoom. I think that's what you wanted. Is that correct?
Yes.
Last Thursday, I think Reed, as a realtor, had some time off, and I took time off, and city staff, and we went over the Sager Creek, the course at Sager Creek project. I think it was enlightening. Dawn was there, community development, and I think some good information was shared. And it's a good beginning of addressing Sager Creek and how it can benefit us as a city, as an economic developer. So I'm excited about that project, and it is wrapped up. I'm going to get a little bit lengthy, and I wasn't going to attend the town hall meeting Friday, but I had work to do, but I felt for some reason it was important. I want to be perfectly clear that I'm pro a lot of things, and it's for the greater good of the community and for my fellow citizens. I want everybody to have the American dream, whatever that looks like for you. So when I travel, I carry a passport. I've also gone to the length several years ago. I have a global entry card. So the government's tracking me pretty heavy. And here's my vaccination card. So if you believe they put a microchip in me, they've already done it through many other means. So I carry all these when I travel, and I'm happy to have the opportunity recently to travel again. And I wear my N95 mask. And then yesterday I received from the VA a letter asking me to step up one more time as a prior military person and to get vaccinated. And they're sending that out to all veterans because there's some resistance with veterans also. So when I went to the town hall meeting, the governor laid out the rules of his meeting. I want to be perfectly clear. I'm responding to some emails and texts I got. The city did not set up that format. That's the governor's format. He did town hall meetings all across the state, and he's still doing them. And he's processing information, and the whole hope is to get people vaccinated. He asked for respect, and they had a microphone they passed around. I want to personally thank the people that used that format. And several people spoke of their religious reasons why they weren't getting the vaccine. Some of these folks were educated people, and the governor respected their rights, their religious rights, and that was not going to be opposed of them. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech. He was redundant on that. There was some theories out there that are concerning, but the one thing that I found the most concerning is I didn't recognize many people in the crowd, but standing in the back, a gentleman from Siloam that is a resident of Siloam, and I know he's a religious man, showed up late and immediately started blurting out words that incited the already emotional, fearful crowd. I mean, it was evident by the way they were yelling at the governor and the level of disrespect they were showing to the format of that meeting. I don't know why this person chose to incite that, and as he shouted that out, he pulled out his camera and began whatever documentation he was beginning. One of the words he used was witchcraft. I find it, as a human being, deeply disturbing, that language that was being used. That is not the people I represent in Siloam. To me, that is no different than radical Islam. It's not within my vocabulary. It is not how we hold a meeting. It's not how we process information, whether we agree or disagree. I looked up 3 key words over the weekend, and I spent quite a bit of time. Apocalyptic religious, secular, and COVID. And when you look those up, my mind was blown that we have citizens in this community that have gone to such a level. Just educate yourself what's going on. So I am going to ask publicly, I wanted to speak at that format, but I did bark out on the request of somebody because I have a large volume voice. Respect. I used the word respect. And there was a moment of silence. But when this individual showed up, we were able to get the crowd riled up again. Once again, that is not Siloam Springs, Arkansas. That's not my America, and I'm not into it. That behavior is not acceptable. It is not acceptable for many, many people in this community. I respectfully request that that citizen, and he monitors these meetings, he's got his ear to the ground. I would like for him to show up at the next board meeting, and when we have a non-agenda item, give that person 3 minutes and to explain to us his ties to witchcraft and why he would come there to a format instead of providing information like everybody else did, whether you agree or disagree with it, why he would treat the governor and why he would treat this community in such a manner. I don't understand it. I despise it at the highest level, and I'm using this public format to say that. And that's the beauty of it. I didn't have to get caught up in that. I did excuse myself from that meeting, and if we remember earlier in the year, I said a prayer, and I think that prayer is something like patience, tolerance, and understanding. And my tolerance and understanding at that meeting was gone. I applaud the police officers that were there. Man, I could never be a police officer. I just don't have the patience or the tolerance or the understanding. So I applaud you guys for what you endure. When I left that building, I did talk to a couple police officers, and I used what I like to call fireman language. I'm a little bit freer to say that. And so I just wanted to use that format right now to just remind the citizens that I represent in Ward 2 that is not how we hold the meetings here. That is not how we respect the governor down there or any city official or any official at any level. And I can tell you this, I'm an independent. Ace has been a great governor. Don't always agree with everything he does. I didn't vote for the man that's in office now, and I didn't vote for the other guy. I'm not a fan of either one of them. This has nothing to do with politics. This has everything to do with keeping our citizens healthy and alive. I'm glad the folks have decisions that they make. I'm a big fan of freedom of religion. Take your stand, but be respectful when we're processing information. I think the citizens that show up and they have concerns and they give their concerns and then they leave that trust to us. And you're not going to like what's going to come down the pike at the city, at your private business. And if they make it mandatory to get vaccinated and you're upset because you're out of a job, it's real simple. Get vaccinated. I've been vaccinated. I've never had the shingles, but I was eligible to get the shingle shot. Doesn't mean it's going to prevent me from getting the shingles. It just means I'm going to be reduced the traumatic effects of getting the shingles. I just encourage us to please take a step back, a deep breath, think of your neighbor. And my statement is really simple. I've chosen to get vaccinated as an action statement. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Marla?
Thank you, Director Burns. That was good thoughts. I am experiencing a lot of COVID at my work, unvaccinated and vaccinated. But still, I look at myself, the reason I got vaccinated was for my family. I've got 4 grandkids that are not eligible for the vaccination. And I worry about them going to school. There is a lot of decisions to be made as to how they will go back with mask or not. And it all comes down to if we would get the vaccination, those that are eligible, we could put this, we may not end it, but we could settle it down a lot. And I remember when I was little, they would load us up on the school bus, and Renee remembers this too, and take us to the community building. And they line us up, and they just walked us through there, and we all got our shots. And sometimes it was with the same gun for the chicken pox, you know. And I was terrified as a child, but I mean, that was the law. And I don't want to see this become a law, but if we look around, it is. People will lose their jobs if they don't get it. And we need to be educated. And if we believe it's witchcraft or other things, or it's got tracking mechanisms in it, or it's going to alter our DNA, we need to be educated. It's our responsibility to be educated, and we need to go to a good source. So, I mean, your family physician, and there's websites. Don't get brought in by some of the mistruths. Once you see a family suffer a COVID loss, or the devastation it does to a body from having it for a month and not being able to recover, you don't want that happening to you or anyone in your family. So now to my thought about all of the housing projects we've been approving. I just want to make a statement that, yeah, I'm all for this. I think it's wonderful we're going to have new community members, but I just want us to be mindful that we need to have the support services that go along with our growing community. Are we going to have more fire departments, police officers? Are we going to have more shopping centers, more supermarkets? 400 houses here, 400 houses there, 120 here, 80 there. It adds up. And I would like to know where we stand and what's on the board now for future development. How many houses have we approved? And I think that's a number that should be pretty accessible. But I think we need to just take a step back and look at that, because the draw that is even our school system, how much more does it have to grow to keep up with all these houses? And, playgrounds, parks, all of those facilities, it's very important that we offer entertainment, sports facilities, everything for the cross-section of our community. And I just think that we step back and look at where we're going and what we need to make sure that the quality of life in Siloam continues as it is. And as far as Zoom meetings, no, I go back to wear my mask. Sunshine and soap. Go back to what your parents taught you. And I think the extra vacation day would be wonderful. And, it's hard to instill these thoughts into coworkers, your staff. I have some really, really good people that work for me that chose not to, and it scared everybody else once they got sick, and he's hospitalized now, into encouraging the other members of the staff. And I just want to reach out the community and say, just roll your sleeve up, get your shot, just like you did when you was in elementary school. Well, most of us anyway. So, and that's it.
Thank you, Marla. Lisa?
As far as the Zoom meetings, I'd prefer not to. I'm like Marla. I'd rather wear my mask. The days off, I agree with Mindy. If you're going to do it, I think you need to go back to the employees that have already done it, to only make it fair. And sorry, I didn't bring my glasses today, so I have to pull things closer. And welcome Cole, Ellison, and Connor Callahan. We welcome you to the police department, and thank you for choosing Siloam. And I want to piggyback on Marla's comment. When we look at, as we're growing, and we want to make sure our departments are adequately staffed, we also want to make sure that they're competitive in their wages so that we can keep them once we get them.
Thank you, Lisa. Reed?
Thank you, Mayor. I would rather be in person than in a Zoom meeting. And if a day off would help someone to get the vaccine if that's their wish, then I'm for that one. I want to say that I'm thankful for our new maintenance facility and the improved working abilities that come with it. I would like to ask that we as members of our community be mindful of our transition into fall with schools starting, that we can do this with excellence and continue to be who we are. Last Friday, we were honored to receive our governor into a setting where all sides could be heard concerning the pandemic and our steps forward. This is our democracy. Some spoke with respect, others did not. I would like to make a point concerning how we look at the pandemic. Each of us thinks individually about our health and our welfare. The governor, however, must think in terms of 3 million plus people in ways that allow us as individuals to live and maintain our lives and livelihood. My prayer is that any lie will be exposed and extinguished, and that truth will prevail. Truth cannot be defeated. Unity will build, hate will tear apart. We do have the right, as citizens of these United States, to free speech. But whether we agree or disagree, we also have the God-given right to show respect to our leaders and the position they hold. Thank you.
Thank you, Reed. Carol?
First of all, I want to welcome the new police officers and thank you for the opportunity to serve our community. Zoom, I don't have a problem with Zoom. I can do Zoom or I can be here. And I am all for having a day off if that will get somebody vaccinated, but also, as others have said, it should be for everyone that's been vaccinated of the staff. I did not go to the meeting on Friday for one thing. I'm trying to avoid larger crowds. I'm trying to be mindful of other people. If you've noticed, I'm wearing my mask. I think when you are associated with the health community, you have family members that are doctors, maybe you're a little bit more concerned and hear a little bit more of what is going on in the community. This is not a political issue. This is a health issue, and I think Brad mentioned that. And it has become so politicized. We just need to think very carefully about the decisions that we are making, where we are getting our information. Hopefully we're not getting it off of social media. Hopefully we're talking to our healthcare providers. Regarding the meeting on Friday, I did watch it live because the city did broadcast it. I was very embarrassed. I think some of the people that were speaking were not our citizens. I think they were from someplace else. But as others have mentioned, that is not the way Siloam people behave, I hope. I hope that we can be respectful of other people. Everybody has their own opinion. You are entitled to your own opinion. Give respect, though. This has just really brought the worst, I think, of all of us sometimes, this pandemic. And it shouldn't be. We should be thinking about our fellow man and their health and taking care of each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. David?
Philip, I want to tell you I appreciate you going after, or not going after, but explaining and getting the Airbnb set up. We saw, well, it was within our consent agenda, but we saw the applications or the type of ones that we're going to have, and it was really impressive. I thought it was great, and I appreciate you getting that started because it's one of those things most people wouldn't have thought of, and I appreciate it a lot. I also appreciated what you did on the broadband. I welcome our new police officers. I'm very, very impressed that they are Marine veterans. I did have a question, Philip, on the pier. Why is it going to be so late in October? We can't do it any sooner? We can't get the
Well,
bulkheads?
they've just started constructing the pier. They're out of Pennsylvania, so the goal is that in mid to late September, they would ship it here.
Okay.
And then the first week in October, hopefully we start constructing it, and it'd take maybe a week, but I'm shooting for, starting mid-October just for.
So it's on their schedule. I didn't know if
it's all on their
okay.
schedule.
All right. Thank you, sir. Let's see what else I had. I am either or on Zoom meetings. It doesn't matter to me. I've done enough of them that I know how to do them now. In terms of masks, I've not quit wearing a mask to Walmart or wherever I go usually, and I just don't see the big deal about it myself. We've got the Delta variant now. There's another one already they're talking about. Before you know it, it'll be the entire Greek alphabet. My problem with the extra day off is that you're getting discriminatory and you're getting close to lawsuit territory. It's very similar to what the federal government has suggested of $100 to any citizen who gets the vaccine. It shouldn't be pressure on anyone. It should be up to each person's conscience. But I think we need to be cognizant of the masks are the first line for anybody, and it should be just common sense to wear them. And I personally don't see the problem with it. I did not go to the meeting, but I saw part of it on TV, and I saw part of it online. And I was telling Carol before the meeting that if I had been there, I would have grabbed that mic, and even though I respect everyone's right of free speech, and I respect a lot of the opinions of some of the people that may have been giving their opposite opinion, I have no patience for disrespect to our governor in any shape, form, or fashion. And I would have demanded that those people give respect to our governor. He is our leader for this state. He has had the most thankless job of a governor in 50 years. So it frustrates me for anyone to be booing him. It hurt me years ago, even though he wasn't our governor. He had been our governor when Mike Huckabee was here at JBU, and people were booing him at JBU. And that made Siloam look ridiculous. Regarding the vaccination when we were kids, there had been many, many years of research on those vaccinations, and I've still got this mark on my arm from it for rubella and smallpox, etc. And in fact, those vaccinations in years past, the research, if there had been 50 deaths, that vaccination was shut down. There has been over 10,000 deaths from COVID vaccines. And therefore, each person should be able to make their decision based upon their conscience or their religious conviction. There should not be any pressure upon anybody to be pushed into getting something put into their body. And I am not one to believe all the ridiculous stuff. I am disgusted to hear that anyone was screaming witchcraft. It just blows my mind. It never ceases to amaze me sometimes, the ridiculous opinions of people. But I don't know. I'm not in favor of shutting down services in our city that our citizens pay for. I think you can protect staff just as easy as we've done in the past. I think our library needs to be open. You have people that use that library and need it, and if there's going to be another lockdown, they're going to need something like the library to be able to go to. I really cannot stress enough that those who complain about the masks and how the masks don't do any good, if you've not caught it and you've continued wearing a mask, you ought to thank the fact that it probably did help. I think the city has always been about safety, but you can go too far in attempting to control public opinion on vaccinations. And I truly believe in each person's freedom of choice, every person's freedom of speech, and certainly every person's most valued right of freedom of religion. But I do not believe that we should be pressuring people to get vaccinated. We can encourage them to get educated. We can encourage them to look at all the opportunities with their healthcare professional. There's a lot of doctors out there that do not support the vaccine. So just because some do does not mean the entire healthcare industry supports it. Anyway, I don't know. I had one question, Philip, on that ARPA money. Could we apply that to the GRDA? Fine. Or I know you don't know the rules yet. Whenever you get the rules, has that got to be capital projects or what?
The 5 or 6 categories, I don't think the GRDA funds would fit into that, because it's not COVID related in somehow, some way.
Well, I knew the money's supposed to be COVID related, but it's kind of a question of where does that begin and end in terms of what was affected by COVID. So
not all COVID related. Some of it is for water and wastewater projects. But when we come back in 2 weeks, we'll have a little bit. We'll have at least a little bit broader knowledge, hopefully, at that point in time.
Of what's available. Yeah. And if there's no one else, I make a motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say no. We are adjourned.